I got started in painting because I used to do puppet workshops in the elementary schools in Wellesley and in Newton and one in Quincy. And I used to be a puppeteer. And my husband and a friend of ours, we all performed together. We made our own puppets, but then we started doing workshops where the kids would make the puppets. And they would do the performance based on an international folktale. And I would be the narrator, musician, and sound effects person, and they would act out the folktale. So different kinds of puppets, different sizes. Some had 10 kids, some were just little hand puppets, some were masks, and they did a really good job. I never knew exactly what was going to happen, so sometimes while being the narrator, I have to stop myself from laughing at some of their antics when they were performing. But doing that, I used parent volunteers, and one of the parent volunteers said, you should write a book about how to do these workshops. So I thought, that's a good idea, so I started writing something, and then I wanted to show how to make the puppets, because Jackie and I designed how to make all these puppets out of inexpensive materials, and I couldn't figure out how. I'm a visual learner, and I thought if somebody's just reading the words, if they're like me, it's not going to make much sense to them. So I got library books. Actually, I learned to draw from the library. And I just did the exercises. I kept taking out books. I started sending out some drawings and a sample chapter to different publishers. And one finally, I got a lot of rejections, but Davis Publishers finally said they were interested. They liked the writing, but they weren't so sure about the drawing. So I tried again several times with them. I kept practicing, got better, and so they sent me a sample of somebody who they wanted to have illustrate the book. And I looked at it and I thought, well, this is better than what I've been doing, but not that much better. So I said, give me another try. I practiced for another week, and then they accepted it. So I learned to draw, and then I thought, wouldn't it be nice to add color? So I saw a course in watercolor at the Wellesley College in the greenhouses. Friends of Horticulture there have classes. And I took my first watercolor course from Sue Goldman, and Jane Goldman, sorry. And then Sue Swinan took it over, and I really enjoyed her teaching style, and I really enjoyed watercolors. I like the flow. A certain amount of it is unpredictable, which I kind of like, and then I react to. So that's kind of the back door of how I got into painting. I call myself a water media artist because I also do ink brush painting, and I teach ink brush painting, and I teach watercolor and experimental techniques in watercolor. So sometimes I can combine other mediums, like I use some acrylics, but not as a paint, more as a resist. I drip acrylics on, and then when it dries, it's resists with the watercolor. And I use some acrylic mediums. They have a zillion different mediums, so I use some of their mediums, but they always have watercolor in them. Well, I've wanted to go to Iceland for a really, really long time, like decades, and finally in 2016, actually, the puppet group, my friend and my husband, we all went together to Iceland, and we mostly went along the south shore and up part of the west coast. And it was just it was every bit as gorgeous as I thought. It had big, stark landscapes, had a lot of water because they have glaciers and they have a lot of weather. And so there's always like water running down hillsides. They have beautiful steep cliffs and hillsides. And so I didn't bring my painting supplies there because I wanted to go around and look and do things. But I did take a lot of photographs, and I used a combination of photos and switch things around a little for my own compositions to make these paintings of my interpretations of the things about Iceland that I most liked. There was one day we went for this hike, and it was so windy, and it started hailing, and there was driving rain, and I was wearing like several layers, a rain jacket, rain pants, and by the time we got down at the end of our hike, I was completely soaked, even despite all the rain gear. Coming around a corner, sometimes I had to like grab onto something because the wind was so strong. But most of the weather wasn't that bad, and actually I kind of get excited by weather like that too. Yes, I do representational, which these are, or at least my interpretation of representational, but I also like to do abstracts. And the main difference to me is representational. There's a certain scene or object, subject that you're trying to capture somehow and present your interpretation. But with abstract, you have no idea, or at least I don't. When I start, I have no idea how it's going to end up. And sometimes that's when I use the accidental, like the drip resist, or sometimes I use melted beeswax and I'll drip it on a painting, on the paper. Sometimes I put materials on the paper, screening or cloth or cheesecloth or bubble wrap, put it on the paper and then pour paint through it, or put it on the wet paint and then let it dry, and when I lift it off it leaves a pattern behind. And so that gives me some ideas. Then I have to turn it into something. So the accidents get me excited and I turn it all around different ways, look for something that strikes me, oh, it'd look really neat if I added this, or it'd be really neat if I put this over here, or put a dark shape or add a dark background to this. It makes me really, all my gears are clicking when I'm working on abstract, because basically abstract, you're working with the basic tools of art, like shape, color, value, but you don't really necessarily know what the final product is going to look like. Representation, usually I plan. I even write notes to myself how I'm going to approach a subject, what things I'm going to do first, what colors. I do a lot of color tests, what color, especially for these Iceland paintings. I tested a lot of colors to try and capture some of the colors I saw. And I used quite a few of the Daniel Smith Prismacolors, which have actual minerals in them, so they do this really nice granulation. If you look closely at some of these paintings, they have granulation going on and a really nice kind of accidental visual texture. Not, if you put your hand on it, would feel flat, but it's visual texture. And that, to me, captured the grittiness of Iceland, because it's mostly volcanic rock and broken down volcanic rock, so it's pretty gritty and has these beautiful black beaches, so that the foam just looks incredible, the contrast of the white foam and the black beaches. I teach at Elm Bank. I teach 2 watercolor classes on Tuesdays at Elm Bank, and they were nice enough to let me use their room, one of their rooms, for teaching. I teach Chinese brush painting in Needham, and I teach watercolor in Bedford, and some workshops in my home, and New Arts Center in Newton. I teach some workshops there. What I usually do, I do demo, because like I said, I'm a visual learner, so I always include some demo in my teaching, so that other people who are visual learners will get something from the class. I also usually have handouts, trying whatever I'm working on, trying to get the point across, what things to emphasize. I collect other works, other artists that are working with whatever principle or element I'm trying to emphasize, or if it's other experimental works using some of the same mediums. And so handouts, demos, and other examples is what I usually do. In the end of January, beginning of February, my husband and I are going to the Galapagos. So again, I'm going to take a lot of pictures. It'll be the rainy season, so I've already invested in waterproof bags and a waterproof camera, and I'm going to be taking a lot of photographs and hopefully another series of Galapagos this time.